In the spring of 1941, Nazi Germany's surface fleet stood at a crossroads. The grand vision of a powerful Kriegsmarine sea capable of challenging British naval supremacy had been severely constrained by the realities of war and industrial capacity. Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, knew that Germany could never match Britain's numerical advantage in capital ships, but he believed that Germany's newest battleships, built with the most advanced technology and the lessons of the Great War, could tip the balance through superior design and aggressive tactics. The crown jewel of this strategy was the battleship Bismarck, named after the Iron Chancellor who had forged the German Empire. At 5,900 tons fully loaded, stretching 251 meters in length, and armed with 8 38-centimeter guns that could hurl 800-kilogram shells across 36 kilometers of ocean, the Bismarck represented the pinnacle of German naval engineering and the hope that technological superiority might compensate for numerical inferiority. The Bismarck's construction began on July 1, 1936, at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg, where thousands of workers labored for nearly 3 years to create this floating fortress. The ship was launched on February 14, 1939, in a ceremony attended by Adolf Hitler himself, and the christening was performed by Dorothee von Löwenfeld, granddaughter of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. But launching was merely the beginning. Another year and a half of fitting out was required before the battleship could be commissioned into service on August 24, 1940. Every aspect of the Bismarck's design reflected German engineering philosophy: robust construction, redundant systems, and firepower capable of destroying any enemy it might encounter. The main battery consisted of 4 twin turrets, designated Anton and Bruno forward and Caesar and Dora aft, each housing 2 38-centimeter SK-C-34 guns. These weapons were derivatives of the guns designed for the never-completed battlecruisers of World War I, refined and improved with decades of engineering advancement. The guns could elevate to 30 degrees, providing that impressive maximum range of 36,520 meters, though effective combat ranges were typically much shorter. Each gun could fire approximately 3 rounds per minute under optimal conditions, with the turrets traversing electrically and the guns elevated hydraulically. The German designers chose to mount 8 guns in 4 twin turrets, rather than adopting the triple or quadruple turret arrangements favoured by other nations, reasoning that this configuration provided better fire distribution and reduced the risk of losing a large portion of the ship's firepower from a single hit. Beyond the main battery, the Bismarck carried a formidable secondary armament of 12 15-centimeter L-55 guns in 6 twin turrets, 3 mounted on each side of the ship. These weapons were designed to engage enemy cruisers and destroyers that might attempt to close within torpedo range. The anti-aircraft armament was equally impressive. 16 10.5-centimeter C-33 guns in 8 twin mountings provided heavy anti-aircraft defense, while 16 37mm guns and initially 12 20mm guns offered close-range protection against aircraft. By April 1941, shortly before the ship's final sortie, 2 of the single 20mm guns were replaced by quadruple 20mm mounts, increasing the light anti-aircraft firepower. The entire armament suite was coordinated by 3 fire control director stations, each equipped with sophisticated rangefinders and the revolutionary FUMO-23 SeaTac radar system, giving the Bismarck the ability to engage targets with accuracy even in poor visibility. Protection was equally important as firepower in German naval design philosophy. The Bismarck's main armor belt was 320 millimeters thick, inclined inward to enhance its effectiveness against incoming shells. This belt protected the ship's vitals: the magazines, engine rooms, and command spaces. Above the main belt, 2 armored decks added additional protection. the upper deck being 50 millimeters thick and the main armoured deck ranging from 100 to 120 millimeters. The main gun turrets were protected by 360 millimeters of face armour and 220 millimeters on the sides, making them virtually impervious to anything but the heaviest shells at close range. German designers had created what they believed was an unsinkable ship, one that could absorb tremendous punishment and continue fighting. The heart of the Bismarck was its propulsion system, 3 sets of geared turbines powered by 12 high-pressure boilers, driving 3 propeller shafts and generating 150-170 shaft horsepower. This massive power plant could drive the ship to a maximum speed of 30.8 knots, though 28 knots was more typical for sustained operations. The Bismarck carried 8,294 tons of fuel oil, giving it an operational range of approximately 8,900 nautical miles at 19 knots. For a ship intended to raid commerce in the vast expanses of the Atlantic Ocean, endurance was as important as armour and guns. Life aboard the Bismarck for its crew of over 2,200 officers and men was a strange mixture of naval tradition and industrial modernity. The ship had been designed with crew comfort in mind, featuring amenities unusual for warships of the era. There was a ship's bakery, a large galley capable of feeding the entire crew, and even a small cinema where propaganda films and entertainment could be shown during off-duty hours. But these comforts could not disguise the reality that the Bismarck was a weapon of war, and every man aboard understood that when they sailed into combat, they would face the most powerful navy in the world. By May 1941, the strategic situation for Germany's surface fleet had deteriorated significantly. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, having completed a successful commerce raiding operation in the Atlantic, were now bottled up in Brest, France, under constant bombardment by the Royal Air Force. Scharnhorst required major engine repairs, and Gneisenau had been torpedoed by British aircraft, putting her out of action for 6 months. The original plan for Operation Rheinübung had called for all 4 of Germany's modern capital ships to sortie together into the Atlantic, but now only the Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen were available. Admiral Günther Lutyens, who would command the operation, was one of the Kriegsmarine's most experienced officers. Born in 1889, Lutyens had served in the Imperial German Navy during World War I and had steadily risen through the ranks during the interwar period. He was known as an excellent staff officer and tactician, though some considered him overly cautious. In January 1941, Lutyens had successfully commanded Operation Berlin, leading the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau on a raid that sank or captured 22 Allied merchant ships, totalling 115,622 tons, without loss to his force. It was this success that made him the natural choice to command Operation Rheinübung, but Lutyens himself harboured doubts about the mission. The objectives of Operation Rheinübung were clear but challenging: break out of the Baltic Sea, transit through the Denmark Strait or one of the other passages between Iceland and the European mainland, and reach the open Atlantic where the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen could wreak havoc on the convoy lanes that sustained Britain's war effort. Grand Admiral Raeder's orders to Lutyens emphasized that the primary target was merchant shipping, and that enemy warships should only be engaged when necessary and without excessive risk. The German strategy was not to fight a decisive fleet action, which Germany would inevitably lose, but to tie down British naval forces and destroy enough merchant shipping to strangle Britain's economy. On the evening of May 18, 1941, at 2100 hours, the Prinz Eugen weighed anchor and slipped out of Gottenhafen harbour on the Baltic coast of occupied Poland. 5 hours later, at 0200 on May 19th, the Bismarck followed, its massive bulk pushing through the dark waters. The 2 warships sailed independently through the night, rendezvousing off Cape Arkona on Rügen Island at 11:25 hours on May 19th. It was there that Captain Ernst Lindemann, commanding officer of the Bismarck, announced over the ship's loudspeakers that they were bound for the North Atlantic to attack British shipping for a period of several months. The revelation sent a mixture of excitement and apprehension through the crew. They were about to test themselves against the greatest navy in the world. The small task force, now escorted by destroyers Z-23 and Z-16 Friedrich Eckholt, proceeded westward through the Danish islands into the Kattegat. German High Command had halted all merchant shipping through the Great Belt and Kattegat on May 19th and 20th in an attempt to maintain secrecy, but such massive ships could not move undetected. On the morning of May 20th, as the German ships entered the Kattegat and sailed north toward the Skagerrak, Swedish aircraft on routine patrol spotted them. Around 1300 hours, the Swedish cruiser Gotland, equipped with aircraft carrying capability, made visual contact with the German formation and filed a routine report. Though Sweden was officially neutral, information had a way of travelling, and British intelligence sources in the Swedish government soon learned that 2 large German warships had been observed heading north. The ships entered Norwegian waters on May 21st, seeking brief refuge in the Korsfjord near Bergen. Admiral Lutyens had initially intended to proceed directly north without stopping, but the clear weather forced a change of plans. The Bismarck anchored in Grimstad Fjord at a distance of 250 to 500 metres from shore, while Prince Eugen moved to Kalvanis Bay, where she topped off her fuel tanks. The destroyers positioned 2 merchant ships alongside Prince Eugen as improvised torpedo shields. The voyage from Gottenhafen to Bergen had covered approximately 950 miles, and now they would wait for darkness before making their dash for the open Atlantic. But the brief stop in Norwegian waters proved catastrophic for operational security. British reconnaissance aircraft from RAF Coastal Command photographed the German ships in their anchorage, confirming their presence and approximate position. The Admiralty in London reacted immediately. Admiral Sir John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, ordered multiple forces to sea to cover the possible routes the German ships might take. The battlecruiser HMS Hood and the newly commissioned battleship HMS Prince of Wales, with escorting destroyers, were dispatched to the Denmark Strait under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland. 2 heavy cruisers, HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk, already on patrol in the Denmark Strait, were ordered to maintain vigilant watch. Additional cruisers were sent to guard other potential breakout routes south and east of Iceland. On the evening of May 21st, under cover of darkness, the Bismarck and Prince Eugen weighed anchor and headed north at high speed, leaving their destroyer escorts behind, as those smaller vessels lacked the fuel capacity for extended Atlantic operations. The 2 warships hugged the Norwegian coast, using the complex geography and poor weather to mask their movements. They steamed through fog and intermittent snow squalls, conditions that offered concealment but also made navigation treacherous in the mine-strewn waters of occupied Norway. By May 23rd, the German ships had entered the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Iceland and Greenland, where the cold waters of the Arctic Ocean meet the North Atlantic. The strait was notorious among sailors. Icebergs carved from Greenland's glaciers drifted through the area, fog was frequent, and the weather was unpredictable even in summer. But it was also one of the few routes through which large warships could reach the open Atlantic, and the Royal Navy knew it. HMS Suffolk, equipped with Type 284 surface search radar, was patrolling the strait specifically to detect German breakout attempts. At approximately 1922 hours on May 23rd, Suffolk's radar detected the German ships at a range of about 7 miles. The British cruiser immediately shadowed the Germans, maintaining contact while staying just beyond visual range and transmitting regular position reports to the Admiralty. When Suffolk moved closer to confirm the radar contact visually, lookouts aboard Prince Eugen spotted the British cruiser through the fog and mist. Admiral Lutyens now knew his force had been detected, but there was no turning back. HMS Norfolk joined the shadowing operation, and the two British cruisers played a dangerous game of cat and mouse, tracking the German ships through the night while staying beyond the range of Bismarck's guns. Vice Admiral Holland, aboard HMS Hood, calculated an intercept course and drove his ships northwest at maximum speed. Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy, the largest warship in the world when commissioned in 1920, and for 2 decades she had served as the visible symbol of British naval power, visiting ports around the Empire in peacetime. At 42,670 tons and armed with 8 15-inch guns, Hood was an imposing sight, but she had been designed in the aftermath of World War I's Battle of Jutland and suffered from weaknesses that 20 years of technological advancement had made critical. Her deck armour was thin, vulnerable to plunging fire from long-range engagements, and she had never received the comprehensive modernisation that would have corrected this deficiency. Accompanying Hood was HMS Prince of Wales, one of Britain's newest battleships, commissioned in late March 1941, barely 2 months earlier. Prince of Wales mounted 10 14-inch guns in 2 quadruple turrets and 1 twin turret, a powerful armament, but the ship was still working up. Her crew was inexperienced, many secondary systems had not been fully calibrated, and the revolutionary quadruple gun turrets were proving mechanically unreliable. Civilian technicians from Vickers Armstrong were still aboard, frantically trying to correct mechanical problems with the main armament, even as the ship steamed toward battle. At 05:35 hours on May 24th, lookouts aboard Hood made visual contact with the German ships at a range of approximately 17 miles. The Germans were sailing in line ahead with Prince Eugen leading and Bismarck following at about 1,000 yards distance. The British ships approached from the southeast, and Holland's tactical situation was immediately problematic. The angle of approach meant that initially only his forward turrets could engage, while the Germans, sailing on a more favourable bearing, could bring their full broadsides to bear. Holland needed to close the range quickly to bring all his guns into action and to reduce the vulnerability to plunging fire that might penetrate Hood's thin deck armour. At 05:52 hours, Hood opened fire at a range of approximately 25,000 yards. Within seconds, Bismarck and Prince Eugen responded, their guns roaring defiance across the grey waters of the Denmark Strait. The engagement that followed would become one of the most famous naval actions in history, decided in minutes by a combination of tactical positioning, technological advantage, and catastrophic bad luck for the British. The German fire was devastatingly accurate from the start. Both Bismarck and Prince Eugen initially fired at Hood, mistaking the British battlecruiser for the more dangerous Prince of Wales. The British ships were approaching almost bow-on, presenting narrow targets while unable to use all their armament. Admiral Holland had ordered a turn to port to bring the full broadsides to bear, but that turn would never be completed. At 0600 hours, after just 8 minutes of combat, a salvo from Bismarck's 5th salvo struck HMS Hood between her mainmast and rear funnel. The shell, weighing 800 kilograms and travelling at nearly supersonic speed, penetrated the thin deck armour and detonated in or near one of the ship's main magazines. The explosion was apocalyptic. A massive fireball erupted from Hood's centre, blowing the ship apart amidships. The forward section, propelled by residual momentum, continued moving for a few seconds before plunging beneath the waves. The stern rose vertically, propellers still turning, then disappeared in less than 3 minutes. Of Hood's crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. The pride of the Royal Navy had been destroyed in one of the most shocking naval disasters in British history. The psychological impact was enormous. Hood had been considered nearly invincible, a symbol of British naval supremacy, and she had been obliterated in minutes. Prince of Wales now faced the German ships alone. The British battleship continued to engage, her 14-inch guns scoring several hits on Bismarck, despite mechanical problems with the turrets. One shell penetrated a fuel tank on Bismarck, causing a leak that would contaminate hundreds of tons of fuel oil with seawater and significantly reduce the battleship's operational range. Another shell struck below the waterline forward, causing flooding in sections Thunter and 14 and giving the ship a slight list to port. But Prince of Wales was taking hits as well, and with hydraulic systems damaged and several turret malfunctions, Captain John Leach made the difficult decision to break off the engagement at 0613 hours. The British battleship withdrew behind a smoke screen, having sustained 7 hits, but remaining combat capable. Admiral Lutyens now faced a critical decision. Bismarck had won the tactical engagement, but the ship had been damaged. The fuel contamination meant the planned extended raiding cruise was impossible, and the forward flooding reduced speed and seaworthiness. After consultation with Captain Lindemann and the engineering staff, Lutyens decided to abandon Operation Rheinübung and make for the French port of Brest, where the ship could be repaired. It was a decision that sealed Bismarck's fate, for the Admiralty in London, enraged by the loss of Hood, was now mobilizing every available warship to hunt down and destroy the German battleship. Through May 24th, Bismarck continued southward, shadowed by Suffolk and Norfolk, which maintained radar contact while transmitting continuous position reports. Prince of Wales, her crew having repaired some of the mechanical problems, rejoined the shadowing operation. Admiral Tovey's main fleet, centred on the battleship HMS King George V, and the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, was racing southwest at maximum speed, attempting to close within striking range. Late on May 24th, Swordfish torpedo bombers from Victorious attacked Bismarck in deteriorating weather conditions, scoring 1 hit that caused minor damage. More significantly, the violent evasive manoeuvres aggravated the forward flooding, forcing repair crews to work continuously to control the damage. During the night of May 24-25, Admiral Lutyens executed a brilliant tactical manoeuvre. Detaching Prince Eugen to operate independently, Bismarck briefly turned toward the shadowing British cruisers, forcing them to retreat to maintain distance. Under cover of this movement, and aided by rain squalls, Bismarck altered course dramatically to the southeast, breaking radar contact. For over 16 hours, the German battleship was effectively lost, steaming toward France, while British forces searched frantically across thousands of square miles of ocean. Admiral Tovey feared the worst, that Bismarck might reach the protection of German air cover before British forces could intercept. The Admiralty threw everything available into the hunt. Force H, commanded by Vice Admiral Sir James Somerville, and centred on the battlecruiser HMS Renown and the carrier HMS Ark Royal, steamed north at high speed from Gibraltar. The old battleship HMS Ramillies, the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, and numerous cruisers and destroyers converged on Bismarck's predicted course toward France. But it was a Catalina flying boat of Coastal Command, on an extended patrol from Northern Ireland, that finally rediscovered Bismarck on the morning of May 26th, approximately 690 nautical miles from Brest. The battleship was still too far away for Tovey's main force to intercept before reaching air cover, but Force H was positioned to make one final desperate attempt. At 1450 hours on May 26th, 15 Swordfish torpedo bombers launched from Ark Royal in deteriorating weather conditions. The first attack was a disaster. The aircraft mistakenly attacked the British cruiser HMS Sheffield, which had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. Fortunately, the magnetic detonators malfunctioned, and Sheffield escaped undamaged. Learning from this near catastrophe, The Swordfish were rearmed with torpedoes fitted with contact detonators for a second strike. At 1910 hours, 15 Swordfish took off into gale-force winds. The obsolescent biplanes, with their fabric-covered wings and fixed landing gear, seemed hopelessly archaic, relics of an earlier era of aviation. Their maximum speed of 138 knots meant that Bismarck's anti-aircraft gunners had extended time to track and engage them. Yet these same characteristics made the Swordfish remarkably difficult to shoot down. They could fly too slowly for modern fire control systems to track effectively, and shells often passed through the fabric covering without detonating. The attack developed in deteriorating visibility and rough seas. The Swordfish approached from different directions, forcing Bismarck's anti-aircraft batteries to divide their fire. The German gunners put up a tremendous barrage, the sky filling with tracers and shell bursts, but the slow-moving biplanes pressed their attacks with extraordinary courage. 2, possibly 3 torpedoes struck home. 1 or 2 hit amidships against the armoured belt and caused minimal damage. But the third, probably dropped by Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat of 818 Squadron, struck Bismarck's stern just above the port rudder. The explosion caused catastrophic damage to the steering gear. The rudders jammed hard to port at an angle between 10 and 15 degrees, and all attempts to repair them failed. Bismarck could only steam in circles, unable to maintain course toward France. At 2340 hours, Captain Lindemann sent a stark message to German Naval High Command. "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." The mighty battleship, which had destroyed Hood and fought off multiple attacks, was now helpless, circling slowly in the cold Atlantic while British forces closed in for the kill. Through the night of May 26-27, British and Polish destroyers harassed Bismarck, launching torpedo attacks that achieved no significant hits but prevented any rest for the exhausted German crew. At dawn on May 27th, Admiral Tovey's force arrived, the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, supported by the cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire. At 0843 hours, lookouts on King George V spotted Bismarck about 25,000 yards away. 4 minutes later, at 0847, Rodney opened fire with her 9 16-inch guns, followed immediately by King George V with her 10 14-inch guns. Bismarck returned fire at 0849, her forward turrets Anton and Bruno engaging Rodney. The German battleship's second salvo straddled Rodney, water from near misses drenching the British battleship's bridge. It was the closest Bismarck came to hitting any British ship in the final battle, for at 0902 a 16-inch salvo from Rodney struck Bismarck's forward superstructure, devastating the bridge and main fire control director. Admiral Lutyens and most of the senior officers were killed instantly. The salvo also damaged the forward turrets, and though the aft fire control station attempted to take over direction of the remaining guns, it too was soon destroyed. With both fire control stations destroyed, Bismarck's shooting became wild and ineffective. The British battleships closed range, pouring salvo after salvo into the German ship. Norfolk and Dorsetshire added their 8-inch guns to the bombardment. By 0920, all of Bismarck's main turrets had ceased firing. Turrets Anton and Bruno were destroyed. Turret Dora was knocked out when a shell exploded inside one of the gun barrels, and turret Caesar fell silent shortly after. The British ships closed to point-blank range, some salvos fired from as close as 3,000 metres, systematically destroying the superstructure and secondary armament. Yet, despite the overwhelming firepower being poured into the ship, Bismarck refused to sink. The ship's armour belt, though penetrated in places, held against most hits, and the Germans' emphasis on internal subdivision and watertight integrity meant the hull remained largely intact, even as the superstructure was reduced to twisted wreckage. Bismarck was a burning hulk, unable to fight or maneuver, but still afloat. At 10:15, realizing they were running low on fuel and still far from home waters, the British battleships ceased fire. Dorsetshire moved in and fired 3 torpedoes into the wreck, at least 2 of which hit. At approximately 10:39 hours on May 27, 1941, the Bismarck finally capsized and sank, taking with her over 2,000 men. Survivors reported that scuttling charges had been set before the ship went down, and post-war examinations by deep-sea exploration teams found evidence supporting this claim. Whether Bismarck was sunk by British gunfire and torpedoes or by her own crew's scuttling charges remains debated, but the practical answer is both. The British had battered the ship into a defenceless wreck, and the German crew finished what the Royal Navy had begun. The British ships immediately began rescue operations. HMS Dorsetshire picked up 85 survivors, and the destroyer HMS Maori rescued another 25. Then, at 11:40 hours, a lookout on Dorsetshire reported a possible submarine periscope, and the rescue effort was abandoned. Hundreds of German sailors were left in the water, clinging to wreckage and life rafts, watching as their potential rescuers steamed away. The German submarine U-74 later rescued 3 survivors, and the weather ship Sachsenwald picked up 2 more. Out of Bismarck's crew of 2,221 men, only 114 survived. The destruction of the Bismarck marked the end of Germany's attempt to challenge British control of the Atlantic with surface raiders. Hitler, shaken by the loss of his navy's most powerful ship, increasingly restricted the remaining capital ships to defensive operations. The battleship Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, would spend most of the war in Norwegian fjords as a fleet in being, tying down British naval forces by her mere existence, but never engaging in significant offensive operations. Germany's surface fleet had proven unable to contest British sea power effectively, and from 1941 onward, the burden of attacking Allied shipping fell almost entirely on the U-boat force. For the Royal Navy, the victory was bittersweet. Hood was lost. Prince of Wales would be sunk by Japanese aircraft in December 1941, and the hunt for Bismarck had required mobilizing much of Britain's available naval strength at a time when ships were desperately needed for convoy escort and other duties. Yet the Admiralty had demonstrated that no German warship, no matter how powerful, could safely operate in waters the Royal Navy considered its own. The symbolic importance of destroying Bismarck after the shocking loss of Hood could not be overstated. It showed that British naval power, though strained, remained dominant. The story of the Bismarck endures because it encompasses so many elements of naval warfare: technological achievement, tactical brilliance, strategic miscalculation, and human courage on both sides. The ship represented the pinnacle of German battleship design, incorporating lessons learned from decades of naval engineering. Its armour and internal subdivision proved remarkably effective, as evidenced by the enormous amount of damage required to finally sink it. Yet that same emphasis on protection came at the cost of speed and range that might have allowed the ship to escape its pursuers. The decision to include vulnerable stern-mounted rudders, prioritizing hydrodynamic efficiency over structural strength, proved catastrophic when a single torpedo hit disabled the steering gear. For those who served aboard Bismarck, the ship was more than a weapon. It was their home, their workplace, and ultimately, for most of them, their tomb. The survivors who struggled in the cold Atlantic waters, watching the British ships disappear over the horizon, experienced both the tragedy of abandonment and the relief of rescue. Their testimonies revealed a crew that fought with discipline and courage, even as their situation became hopeless, maintaining their posts and attempting repairs until the very end. Admiral Lutyens, Captain Lindemann, and most of the officers died at their posts, fulfilling the naval tradition that commanders do not abandon their ships. Today, Bismarck lies in approximately 4,800 meters of water, its hull largely intact despite the violence of its final battle. Expeditions have photographed the wreck, documenting the damage and confirming much of what survivors reported. The ship's last position has become a war grave, a steel monument to the 2,106 men who perished in the cold Atlantic. The Bismarck's operational career lasted just 8 days from leaving port to sinking, yet in that brief time it fundamentally altered the course of the naval war and entered the realm of legend. The pride of the Kriegsmarine had proven formidable in combat, but ultimately unable to change the strategic reality that Britain's numerical superiority and command of essential sea lanes made the German surface fleet's mission impossible. The Bismarck was a magnificent achievement of engineering and a symbol of German naval ambition, but, like the regime it served, that ambition exceeded the resources and strategic position necessary to achieve its goals. The battleship's destruction demonstrated that in modern naval warfare, no single ship, regardless of its power, could prevail against a determined enemy with superior numbers, multiple platforms, and control of the strategic geography.